Good evening, Islam, and greetings to all in peace. We have the opportunity of presenting to you another segment of the teachings of our prophet and leader, the great prophet Noble Drew Ali. I am your host, Brother E. Braswell Bay, and we have with us this evening our distinguished guest and brother, the brother P. Davis Ill. And this evening we're going to have a conversation on one of the many chapters that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali put together in the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. One chapter in particular is Egypt, the capital dominion, the capital empire of the Dominion of Africa. You know, Brother P. Davis Hill, the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, when he put this chapter together, he put so much wisdom in this chapter that being a member of this organization, I find out something new every day, you know. I understand from my readings and study, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali was divinely guided by Allah alone himself. And the chapters that he put in effect in this Quran, like this chapter in particular, has divine wisdom in it, and it stretches back with the history of our people over 10,000 years, or you might say over 50,000 years, and that is a long time. The Prophet Noble Drew Ali, enough cannot be said about this great man and his works, particularly bringing us a knowledge of ourselves. You know, and today, Egypt seems to be a very exciting topic amongst our people. What do you think about that, brother?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's always a pleasure to get together with a Moorish American to discuss the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and Moorish science. It's always a revelation. Yes, the coming of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali to us here in North America marked a milestone in the journey of this race.
I agree.
Of this nation. It marked a milestone in that in the history of our people here in North America, prior to the coming of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, they had not been in contact with divine guidance, with one who was divinely prepared in a long time. And they had lost the knowledge of their divine origin. They had lost the knowledge of their divine rights, of their identity, their birthrights even their citizenship rights. And so the coming of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali to us here in North America made it possible for us to reconnect with our divine origin, with our divine rights, our natural rights, our citizenship rights, our birthrights. And the chapter that you mentioned, the chapter in the Holy Quran entitled Egypt, the capital empire of the Dominion of Africa, is one of those great truths that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali came here to teach in order to set the record straight.
Oh, yeah.
Because there had been so much misinformation about Africa, about the people who are of African descent, and particularly about our people here in North America.
That's interesting too, brother, because if you notice the first, I think it's the first verse in that chapter, it talks about the first inhabitants of Africa. It talks about the fact that old man Cush was one of the first inhabitants of Africa. Now, from our studies, we understand that Cush is synonymous with Egyptian. Is that true, brother? I mean, have you heard something like that before?
Yes, but even before that, in the very first verse of that chapter, the Prophet Noble Drew Ali sets the record straight by saying that the inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. And anyone who has read any of the old records, the old scriptures, particularly the Bible, in the Bible, it's stated that the people of Canaan, that Canaan being the son of Ham, who was supposed to have been cursed, you see. The prophet Noble Drew Ali makes it clear that there was no curse on Canaan. And it's very important that our people understand that they were not cursed by Allah, whom some people refer to as God. It's extremely important that our people understand that. Another thing that is important that they understand is that Africa, the name Africa itself, is a name that was given to the continent by someone else who was not African. The original name of the land is Amexem.
How do you spell that, brother?
Amexem.
Uh-huh.
That is the first true and divine name of Africa, given to that entire region, that entire conglomerate of land, which would include now the present North, South, and Central America.
I see. Now, you know, that's kind of contrary to what some historians have led us to believe. Some historians in the past has led our people and part of the world to believe that Egypt was only that little piece of land that you see right there on the map today. But according to the teachings of our prophet Noble Drew Ali, Egypt would encompass this land called North America. So in essence, what you're saying, and I agree, that this is in fact Upper Egypt.
This is a part of the dominion of Africa before the great earthquake which caused the great Atlantic Ocean. And further evidence of that can be seen in the people of America. When the Europeans arrived here in America, they encountered people who looked like you and I. And
what were they called, do you remember?
They referred to all of these people as being Indians.
Okay. Now, we're not speaking of the Mexican Indians, the ones with the long hair, the ones that we see frequently in the media quite a bit. We're speaking of the so-called Indians that look like you and I.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, they grouped all of the original people of America into one category and called them Indians, our people being among those who were labeled as Indians.
You know, I read something in my studies about the particular tribe called the Nanticoke, the Choctaw, the Cherokee. All of these people had deep olive hue like we had. And they practiced the same customs that our people practiced before the great earthquake on the west coast of Africa. Speaking of the west coast of Africa, you brought out an interesting point at one conversation we had when you gave the miles, the distance that is from the west coast of Africa to the east coast of America. Do you remember that piece of information you shared with me?
Yes, I recall reading in the book that it is closer from the easternmost part of America to the westernmost part of Africa, the easternmost part of America being San Recife, Brazil, to Sierra Leone. It is closer than it is from here to California. A distance of only miles separates America from Africa.
Is that right?
At this present day. That's true.
So that kind of fortifies even more so of what this prophet Noble Drew Ali is teaching us in terms of what Egypt is, where the people originally came from, and how we are still connected to that history to this very day.
Absolutely. We are very much connected with that history. You mentioned the people who were called the Nanticokes and the Choctaws and other people, particularly in the southern part of the United States. Well, I can speak from personal experience with regard to the people who are called Choctaws, because growing up as a child, we lived very close to a Choctaw reservation. And I would see the people occasionally, and they were pretty much indistinguishable from you and I.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these people are not commonly seen on television. You won't find them in the Lone Ranger movies, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But from first-hand experience, there are people who call themselves Choctaws, who've been labeled Choctaws, Indians,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, who will be indistinguishable from you and I. Speaking of the Nanticokes, during the days of slavery, they would be instructed, they were instructed not to venture out too far at night because they may be mistaken for runaway slaves.
Amazing. This is amazing. You know, and the prophet Noble Drew Ali mentions all of these things in this particular chapter of Egypt, the capital empire of the dominion of Africa. And he also says something, you know, if we have enough time, and I'm sure we do, to touch on the fact that he said that the Pharaohs of Egypt gave permission to a certain group of people, particularly the Moabites, the Hittites, the Amorites, to settle and inhabit certain portions of Africa. You know, and the myth is that the pharaohs of Egypt or the Egyptians were cruel and unjust, but basically, according to the prophet Noble Drew Ali, we're talking about the same people, aren't we?
We're talking about the same people. And it's important to go back again to that story of the curse having been placed upon our people. Then we can kind of understand it in a geo-political, religious context.
Mm-hmm.
The myth states that the people of Canaan were cursed and that their land was given to someone else. And so that would seem to set up and justify the people of Canaan being driven from their homelands because someone said that God had given them the land of Canaan, the birthright. And so as we follow the story in time, we find that the people of Canaan were driven out of the Holy Lands by Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
And they received permission from the Pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the western part of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They formed themselves kingdoms, and these kingdoms are called to this day Tunis, Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, etc. Now the original people who were driven out of the land of Canaan were referred to as the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites. The Moabites being an ancient name for the Moors. And it's important to understand that they received permission from the Pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. If they received permission from the Pharaohs of Egypt, that means that they recognize the legitimacy of the house of Pharaoh. And so then we as Moorish Americans, we as Muslims here in America, we come out of the house of Pharaoh. And again, if we go back to that curse story, the prophet Noble Drew Ali came to set the record straight that that the house of Pharaoh was not cursed.
That's right. I can see the same thing there. And, you know, what is interesting is that in this particular chapter, Egypt, the capital empire of Africa, the dominion of Africa, he later on talks about how, in fact, we are connected to these people, as you said, and how we, in fact, according to all true and divine records, can't be Negro, Black, colored, or Ethiopian. That no man could change man from his descendant nature unless his powers is greater than Allah himself. And no man's powers is greater than Allah himself. So that gives us a divine connection that you were talking about earlier.
That's absolutely correct. The terms, the marks, Negro, Black, colored, were placed on our people here in North America during the time of slavery. Now, by accepting those marks, by accepting those definitions, that cut our people off from a knowledge of their ancient forefathers, of their divine origin, you see. So by claiming to be Negroes, by having those terms attached to them, those stigmas, if you will, they cannot trace any history of themselves back any further than slavery, because that's where the terms Negro, Black, Colored, Ethiopian began as they apply to our people here in North America. So it's very important for our people to return those marks, Negro, Black, and Colored, back to the source from which they came, and to assume their natural identity, that being of Moorish descent, Moorish Americans, who are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, who inhabited the northwestern and the southwestern shores of Africa, who received permission from the Pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt.
That's true.
Who originally inhabited the holy land of Canaan, the land where the first physical man himself was formed in flesh. It's very important to have that connection, because by restoring that connection, then we have a connection to our divine right, to our divine origin, to our natural rights, to our birth rights, to our citizenship rights. It is extremely important.
And to our land rights. You talked about the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. And it's interesting, too, because in this same chapter, he talks about the different parts of Egypt that our people were given permission to settle and inhabit. But he also talks about some important things in this chapter in terms of the rivers that flow through there. He spoke about the river Nile that was dredged and made by the ancient pharaohs, and the river Niger. Now, I know that from my studies and books that I've read and studied, that geographically speaking, this Nile River, before the great earthquake, stretched across the continent of Atlantis, into what is now known today as the Mississippi River. That being a man-made river. I think that's a very important point that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali is making very clear to us in this chapter, Egypt, the capital dominion of Africa.
There are indeed some profound and some stunning announcements made in that particular chapter, because if we understand the implications, then it changes everything. It changes everything.
Yes, it does.
It calls into question who are the original inhabitants of America. And if the great God of the universe recognizes any natural and divine right, or any birthright, then it would seem that those birthrights would have to apply to the original inhabitants of the land. And by being connected, by us being Moorish Americans, Muslims, being connected to those who were the original inhabitants of the land, then that says to us, says to our people, that we are not foreigners here in America. We are not recent immigrants, as so many people who happen to live in America at this time are. Where they've come from many different places. They've come from Europe. They've come from different parts of Asia and different parts of the world. But we can trace ourselves back directly to the original inhabitants of the land. Another important point that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali brings out and makes clear in that particular chapter, and that is the people of America. Who were these other people? He mentioned specifically the Moabites, the Hittites, the Amorites. Well, these are the people who were referred to as Indians. And it would seem to us, it would follow logically, therefore, that we have a long and extremely long history, long connection with the people of America, the people who are referred to as Mexicans and the natives of San Salvador and the Atlantis Islands, that if we migrated from the Holy Land back in those ancient days, and that together we sought permission from the Pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit this portion of Egypt, then it would seem that there is a natural alliance between our people here, the Moors, the Moorish Americans, and the other original peoples of America, being the Mexicans and the Nicaraguans and the natives of San Salvador and the inhabitants of the Atlantis Islands. And so we're going to attempt to reconnect those ancient and divine ties to our brothers and sisters here in America.
And I can see that being done in science, as it was done in science. I can see that being undone. Okay, my mind tells me, according to our prophet Noble Durali, that Mexicans come from Mexico. Indians come from India. So, based on what you just said, we can't let that confuse us as being the same people who were given permission by the Pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit this portion of Egypt. We're the same people.
Right.
The only thing, according to our prophet Noble Durali, that separates us is a body of water from each other. But we're the same people. Interesting, though, as we go on in this chapter, he talks about this man-made river, the Nile River. He talks about the fact that this was used for trade and transportation. Well, when we check the history books, we can see that the Nile River was indeed used for trade and transportation, and so was the Mississippi River.
Absolutely.
It was used for trade and transportation. And it's very important, again, for us to know and understand that if we're talking about the same river, we're talking about definitely the same people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No question about
Yeah.
that. We can't emphasize enough the connection to our divine origin. It is extremely important that our people understand that our origin is divine.
Yes. When you
That-
say divine, excuse me, when you say divine, you're saying that we have a connection to this one God?
To the one God. To the one God, who is the Father of the universe, who's known in different lands by different names. Our forefathers referred to him as Allah, or Allah, as some say. Some refer to him as God. But our origin comes directly from him, from the great God of the universe, and that there was no curse on the descendants of Canaan. There is no curse on the house of Pharaoh. There was no curse on the house of Moab. And no, we were not born in sin. It's extremely important that our people understand that. And understanding that, then they'll begin to understand that perhaps they can receive a prophet, one who is directly inspired by the great God of the universe to offer people divine guidance. If we look at the history of the prophecy, for example, the people of Arabia, the people of Palestine, the people of India, the people of China, and other places, that if we look at the origin, the history, we find that the prophet, their divine one, has always come in their image, has always come to them in their image. For example, the people whom Buddha was sent to redeemed looked just like them.
So,
And the people of Confucius looked just like Confucius. The people of Palestine looked just like Jesus. The people of Arabia were just like Muhammad. And that is a divine right to have a prophet come to you in your own likeness and in your own image. And so it was that the prophet Noble Drew Ali, our divine guidance, came to us looking just like you and I. And that is a cause for great joy.
it's a cause for
And
great
great
joy.
celebration among our people here in North America.
Absolutely. And you know, at the beginning of this program, we saw a picture of the prophet Noble Drew Ali. And at the ending of this program, we're going to see another picture of the prophet Noble Drew Ali to see the same things that you're saying right here now, that he indeed looks like you and I. And I'm in full agreement with you, of course, that when we start building up our self-esteem as a people and recognizing that we have a divine right, a divine origin, we will indeed accept the fact that we have a prophet who is divinely prepared by the prophet Noble Drew Ali.
That is absolutely true.
You know, this chapter, Egypt, the capital dominion of the Empire of Africa, is indeed a great chapter. And I've enjoyed discussing it with you intensely.
Oh, we just got started.
Yeah,
You made this time to quit already?
I think it is for now. But for those of our listening audience who would like to know more about Egypt, the